Leaven and leaven and leaven. What's the difference? For the answer to that question, leaven and leaven and leaven, what's the difference? We'll turn to Exodus chapter 12 and we'll begin at verse 14. And I want you to read this with me. Next slide, please. Beginning of verse 14. So this day shall be to you a memorial, and you shall keep it as a feast to the Lord throughout your generations. You shall keep it as a feast by an everlasting ordinance. 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread. Just take a notice at, I've got the word matzah there beside unleavened bread. That translates to literally unleavened bread, matzah. On the first day you shall remove leaven. Here's our first type of leaven called seor. Seor. First type of leaven, seor, from your houses. For whoever eats leavened bread, chametz, that's our second type of leaven, chametz, whoever eats leavened bread, from the first day until the seventh day, that person shall be cut off from Israel. But on the first day there shall be a holy convocation, and on the seventh day there shall be a holy convocation for you. No manner of work shall be done on them, but that which everyone must eat, that only may be prepared by you. So you shall observe the feast of unleavened bread, Chag ha-Matzot in the Hebrew. For this same day I will have brought your armies out of the land of Egypt. Therefore you shall observe this day throughout your generations as an everlasting ordinance. In the first day, or in the first month, on the 14th day of the month at evening, you shall eat unleavened bread, matzah, once again, until the 21st day of the month at evening. For 7 days no leaven, this is seor, no leaven, seor, shall be found in your houses, since whoever eats what is leavened, machmetzet, that's our third type of leaven, machmetzet, that same person shall be cut off from the congregation of Israel, whether he is a stranger or a native of the land. You shall eat nothing leavened, machmetzet, in all your dwellings you shall eat unleavened bread, matzah. So why do I go into that? Why do I show you that the English doesn't give us all the details that we need to really understand what's going on here? But if we take a look at the Hebrew that underlines it, we get a little deeper understanding. Next slide, please. So let's take a look and see what these three types of leaven are. First of all, we'll start with unleavened bread. That's matzah. And you can take a look at that in the Strong's Concordance, H4682. And it just refers to unleavened bread or an unfermented cake or loaf. Bread being the key word here. Next, we start with our first of three types of leaven. The first one is called seor, and that's in H7603. And what that refers to is a sourdough loaf that was kept from usually the day before, and it was used to ferment the next day's bread. Next up, our second type of leaven is chametz, and that's H2557 in the Strong's, and it refers to a leavened or fermented loaf of bread. So you use seor to make chametz. Refers to a leavened or fermented loaf of bread. And then our last type of leaven, machmetzet, which is H4263b, refers to anything leavened. That which is leavened, anything leavened, machmetzet. So how do these things interplay with each other? Well, seor, the first type of leaven that we talked about, seor was the method for leavening your bread. It was the piece of sourdough bread that was taken from the night before, placed in water, so that the leaven, the yeast, would concentrate within it, and it was used to start your bread for the next day. So you would take a little bit of that seor, and you would mix it in with your bread that you were making, and given time, it would puff up and start the fermentation process again. So the result of that is what we call chametz, Chametz being leavened bread. Chametz being leavened bread. Seor was the vessel by which you used to create the next day's bread. And then machmetzet is simply anything leavened. So if we think about today, we think about our world today, how do we create leavened bread today? Most of us don't keep seor or a sourdough loaf and hold it over to the next day, because most of us don't bake bread daily, freshly every day, like they would have done maybe just 50 or 100 years ago even in this country. So what did people do? Well, what do people do today? They carry a packet of bread yeast or a container of bread yeast. That is the same concept as was being used back then. Instead of using bread dough from the previous day, now we have a modern convenience that allows us to keep the dehydrated yeast in a container and use it for the next day. So by extension, I would think that when we read that you're not supposed to keep seor in your house, you must remove seor from your house on Exodus 12:15, that would refer to any containers of yeast that you might be able to use to start bread to this day, because it is the same concept. Rather than keeping the bread from the previous day, we have moved the leaven into a container that we can use at will. So I would consider anything that contains yeast, a packet that contains yeast, as being seor. So that needs to be removed from your houses, anything that can be used to start bread. Chametz is the leavened or fermented loaf of bread. Now, the key to understanding bread is understanding that bread is the result of, or the chametz bread, the leavened bread, is the result of using yeast to puff up a grain, right? You can make bread out of many different things. You can make it out of wheat. You can make it out of barley. You can make oat bread. You can make rye bread. You can make bread out of just about any kind of grain. Traditionally, according to Jewish tradition, they break it down to 5 particular types of wheat. Now, we don't have to stick to this, but it's just interesting to see what has been passed down through time. According to the oral tradition, it is wheat, barley, oats, rye, and spelt. Those are the 5 types of grain that typically are considered, when mixed with leaven, when mixed with yeast, become bread, become chametz, which we're not allowed to eat on these days of unleavened bread. Now, we did talk about beer a little bit earlier. Beer is made out of one of these types of grains, usually. Maybe there's other grains in it, sometimes rice or things like that. But beer is using yeast to create air bubbles to puff up a type of wheat, barley, oats, rye, maybe rice, things like that. And a lot of people say, well, it's the Feast of Unleavened Bread, not the Feast of Unleavened Drink. Well, let's think back to where beer came from. The ancient Israelites indeed had beer. How did they create beer? Well, they created beer by taking that bread that we talked about, the seor, putting it down in water, and then letting it sit there for an indefinite amount of time so that it became ancient beer. Now, the beer making process has been refined over time so that now we have a less cloudy, a more clear type of beer. But nonetheless, it is the same process almost. You take an oat, wheat, barley, rye, and you mix it with yeast. It becomes bubbly. It remains bubbly. And so it's the same thing. It's just a newer version of something old, just like the seor. Instead of using a sourdough loaf, we have a packet of yeast that we use. So by implication, beer is off the menu for unleavened bread as well, because it is a type of leavened bread. It is liquid bread to its utmost. Now, that also brings liquor into play. So what kind of liquors may be made out of oats, wheat, barley, rye, or spelt? Whiskey. Now, there is corn whiskey, and I would still say that that is not allowed, but most of them are made whiskey, different things like that. There's even types of liquor that are made from different types of oats and things like that, but we won't get into that. But whiskey is also a form of liquid bread. They take the beer, basically, that they make from the wheat and from the yeast, and they further distill it down. That means that they concentrate the alcohol and remove the water. So whiskey, beer, things like that are made with things that can be used to make bread. We make that distinction, but in the older days, it really wasn't as much of a solid distinction, that we shouldn't have those either during the days of unleavened bread. And what covers that is the machmetzet, which is in verses 19 and 20. Since whoever eats what is leavened, machmetzet, another translation is anything leavened, that same person shall be cut off from the congregation of Israel. And verse 20 it says, you shall eat nothing leavened, machmetzet. That's anything leavened. You shouldn't take anything leavened into your body, any kind of leavened bread into your body. That's what's being communicated here. Next slide, please. Now, here are leavening agents. There are a lot of different leavening agents in the world. And we don't just have yeast, but we also have many different things today that cause a form of leavening. And these are baking powder, baking soda, baker's yeast, baker's ammonia. There's many different, bicarbonate of soda. Any of these things that would cause gas bubbles within bread to puff it up, any of these things should not be used and should be gotten rid of during the days of unleavened bread. Next slide, please. There are also some other things that are not considered leavening. Autolyzed yeast, brewer's yeast, cornstarch, egg whites, polysorbate 60, and down the line. Some of these do have yeast in them, but they are dead yeast. They are completely ineffective and will not cause the bubbling up or the gases and the fermentation process to begin. So these are not leavening agents. These you do not have to throw out during the days of unleavened bread. Next slide, please. Now there's a question that comes to wine. Are we able to have wine during the days of unleavened bread? Well, if we keep everything in mind that we talked about before, let's go to Leviticus chapter 23. Leviticus chapter 23, and let's read verses 10 through 14 just to see if wine is something that would be acceptable during the days of unleavened bread. Leviticus chapter 23, verses 10 through 14. And this is talking about the offerings that were to be given on what was called the wave sheaf offering day, or sometimes called the first fruits of the barley harvest. Verse 10, speak to the children of Israel and say to them, when you come into the land which I give you and reap its harvest, then you shall bring a sheaf of the first fruits of your harvest to the priest. He shall wave the sheaf before the Lord to be accepted on your behalf. On the day after the Sabbath, the priest shall wave it. And you shall offer on that day, when you wave the sheaf, a male lamb of the first year without blemish, as a burnt offering to the Eternal. Its grain offering shall be 2/10 deal of an ephah of fine flour mixed with oil, an offering made by fire to the Eternal for a sweet aroma, and its drink offering, now this is the key point, its drink offering shall be of wine, 1/4 of a hin. You shall eat neither bread nor parched grain nor fresh grain until the same day that you brought an offering to your God. It shall be a statute forever throughout your generations and all your dwellings. So there are people that say that wine needs to be gotten rid of during the days of unleavened bread. But I ask you, if you're to get rid of all of the wine, not just in your house, but everybody's house around you, and you're to not have it at all, matter of fact, burn it up for the solid portion, how would you be able to bring an offering of wine on the first fruits of the barley harvest day? You wouldn't be able to. So this goes back to the idea that what we're talking about is things that can be used to make bread, leavened bread, which is chametz in the Hebrew. So wine is okay, because wine would have been made later in the year, around about the time of the early fall, around about the time of the fruit harvest, which was taken up around about Tabernacles and Last Great Day. That was the fruit harvest of the time. So the wine would have been made at that time, would have been fermented, and would have been sitting, and the yeast would have all been deactivated or died out from the wine until it got around to about this time of year. So wine is not one of the things that's made out of a form of grain. It's not made out of wheat, barley, oats, rye, and spelt. And according to Leviticus, it's part of the tribute that we're supposed to bring to God on the wave sheaf offering day. And wine is acceptable. Now, once again, it goes back to it's the Feast of Unleavened Bread, but not the Feast of Unleavened Drink. It just depends on what kind of drink we're talking about. Beer being made out of grains and basically being liquid bread is off limits, but wine being made out of fruit is not off limits. I wouldn't recommend making wine during this time because the fermentation process creates air bubbles and things like that. That probably would not be accepted, but wine that has been aged and held would probably be acceptable. So, in conclusion, there are 3 types of leaven mentioned in Exodus chapter 12, verses 14 through 20. And sometimes taking a little deeper look into the text and seeing what it says and using the Spirit that God has given you along with your rational capability, you can determine and suss out what is acceptable and what is not acceptable during the Feast of Unleavened Bread.